The Galactic Unity Academy floated in the endless darkness of space like a jewel made of metal and light, and young Calvros had called it home for nearly 2 years now. His scales shimmered with soft blue bioluminescence as he walked through the crowded corridors, keeping his head down and his steps quick, because, in this place, drawing attention to yourself was never a wise choice. Station Meridian 7 housed students from 32 different species, all of them the brightest minds their worlds had to offer, and all of them trapped together in a floating cage of ambition and fear. Calvros had learned early that intelligence meant nothing here if you could not also survive the social games that ruled every hallway and classroom. He was a Scythian, a species known for their brilliant minds and fragile bodies, which made him a natural target for those who measured worth in physical strength. His people had no claws, no armor, no venom. Only their glowing scales and their desperate cleverness kept them alive in a galaxy full of predators, and the greatest predator in the academy was Draxus Vorkovros. Spotted him across the main atrium, a towering mountain of muscle and armored plates that made other students scatter like frightened fish. The Korthan species sat near the top of the Galactic Predator Index, evolved on a heavy-gravity world where only the strongest and most brutal survived. And Draxus embodied every terrifying aspect of his heritage. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms ending in claws that could tear through ship hull plating, and eyes like burning coals that seemed to see weakness the way other beings saw color. His hide was covered in natural armor plates, the shade of dried blood, and when he smiled, rows of serrated teeth gleamed in the station lights. Everyone feared him, and he knew it. And he loved it. Calvros pressed himself against the wall as Draxus passed, hardly daring to breathe until those heavy footsteps faded into the distance. His heart's, Scythians had 3 of them, gradually slowed their panicked rhythm as he reminded himself that he was not the target today. He was never the target when there was someone new to torment. The whispers had been spreading through the academy for weeks. A human was coming. Humanity was a newly contacted species, barely a century into their spacefaring age, and most of the galaxy knew almost nothing about them except rumors and classified research files that made senior instructors exchange worried glances. Calvros had heard the stories. Of course, everyone had heard that Earth was classified as a Category 12 death world, one of the most dangerous planets ever discovered. But he struggled to believe it when he saw the human girl for the first time. She was small. That was his first thought as he watched her step off the transport shuttle and into the Academy's receiving bay. She barely reached the chest of most species present, with soft brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. And she carried herself with a quiet stillness that made her seem even smaller somehow. Her name was Maya Chun, and she smiled at everyone she met. Calvros found himself staring at her delicate frame, her blunt fingernails, her flat teeth designed for grinding plants rather than tearing flesh. Where were the deadly adaptations that a death world should have produced? Where were the venomous spines or the armored hide or the razor-sharp claws? She looked like prey, pure and simple, and in the academy, prey did not last long. The orientation instructor, a 4-armed Velith named Professor Zax, guided Maya through the registration process while other students gathered to watch. Calvros noticed how they kept their distance, curiosity warring with the vague unease that seemed to follow all humans like a shadow. "Welcome to the Galactic Unity Academy," Professor Zax said in a voice like grinding stones. "You will find that we value excellence here, and we expect all students to contribute to the advancement of galactic knowledge and cooperation." Maya nodded politely, that small smile never leaving her face, and thanked the professor in a voice so soft that Calvros had to strain his hearing membranes to catch the words. She asked questions about her schedule and her quarters and the library access protocols. All perfectly reasonable questions delivered in Perfectly calm tones. Nothing about her suggested danger, nothing. About her suggested she had survived a world that killed 90% of its own species before they could reproduce. Rose might have dismissed her entirely, written her off as just another victim waiting to happen, if he had not noticed one small detail that made his scales flicker with sudden unease. Her eyes never stopped moving, while her body remained still and her voice remained soft. Those dark human eyes tracked every person in the room, cataloging exits and obstacles and potential threats with the mechanical precision of a targeting computer. It lasted only a moment. That flash of something beneath the surface. And then Maya was just a small, smiling girl again, nodding along as Professor Zax explained. The dining hall scheduler Drax noticed her that same day. Rose was in the corridor outside the xenobiology lab when he heard that rumbling voice that always made his blood run cold. And he pressed himself into an alcove just in time to see the massive Corthon blocking Maya's path. She had been walking to her quarters, a stack of data tablets in her arms. And now she stood perfectly still as Draxus loomed over her like a mountain of death. "So this is the famous human," Draxus said. And his translator implant gave his words a mocking edge that needed no translation. "I expected something more impressive from a Deathworld species." Maya looked up at him, her neck craning back to meet those burning eyes, and her expression did not change at all. She simply waited, silent and still, like a small animal frozen before a predator. "Nothing to say?" Draxus laughed, and the sound echoed through the corridor like thunder. "Perhaps your species has not evolved the intelligence for speech yet." "Excuse me," Maya said softly. "I need to get to my quarters." She stepped around him. Kovros felt his jaw drop open as he watched the tiny human simply walk past the most dangerous student in the academy, her steps unhurried and her spine straight, as if Draxus was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle in her path. The Corthon stood frozen for a moment, clearly shocked that his intimidation had failed so completely. Then his eyes narrowed, and a slow smile spread across his terrible face. Kovros recognized that smile, and his heart sank. He had seen it before, directed at other students who had somehow offended the bully's pride. And those students had learned painful lessons in the days that followed. Maya-chan had just made herself a target, and she did not even seem to realize it, or perhaps, Calvros thought with a shiver that made his scales ripple with anxious light, perhaps she simply did not care. 3 weeks passed, and Calvros watched the game unfold with growing dread and helpless fascination. Draxus had found his new prey, and the Corthon was savoring every moment of the hunt like a fine delicacy to be enjoyed, slowly rather than devoured all at once. It started with small cruelties, the kind that left no marks but cut deep into the spirit. Maya would be walking through the corridor, and Draxus would appear from nowhere, his massive shoulders slamming into her small frame hard enough to send her data tablets scattering across the floor. "Watch where you are going, little human," he would say with that terrible smile. And his followers would laugh as Maya silently gathered her belongings. She never complained, never reported him to the instructors, never showed any reaction at all, except that same small smile she wore like armor. Calvros could not understand it, could not fathom how she remained so calm in the face of such constant harassment. The other students noticed too, and the whispers grew louder with each passing day. Some said the human was broken inside, too damaged by fear to even respond properly, while others claimed her species was simply too primitive to understand when they were being threatened. Draxus seemed to favor the second theory, and his attacks grew bolder. He blocked her path in the dining hall, forcing her to find another route to the food dispensers while everyone watched. He spread rumors that humans were barely more than clever animals, that their presence in the academy was a mistake that would soon be corrected. He made sure she was always alone, always isolated. Always aware that she had no friends and no protectors in this place, Calvaros wanted to help her. Some small part of him that remembered what it felt like to be hunted screamed at him to say something, do something, anything at all, but his fear was greater than his compassion. And so he watched from the shadows, like the coward he knew himself to be. Maya continued to smile. She went to her classes and studied in the library and ate her meals alone at a corner table. And through it all, she never once raised her voice or showed her teeth or gave Draxus the satisfaction of seeing her break. It was as if his attacks were nothing more than mild weather, an inconvenience to be endured rather than a threat to be feared. This drove Draxus absolutely insane. Calvaros saw it in the way the Corthan's eyes followed Maya across crowded rooms, burning with a frustration that bordered on obsession. The bully had built his entire identity around his ability to make others fear him, and here was this tiny, fragile creature who seemed immune to his terror. Why does she not break? Draxus snarled one day in the training bay, his claws leaving deep gouges in the practice dummies as his followers watched nervously. Every other weakling in this station trembles when I look at them. But this human, this pathetic little human, she just smiles. His second in command, a lean Vrix named Thesa with venomous spines running down her back, offered a theory that made Calvaros' blood run cold. Perhaps she is simply too stupid to understand danger, Thesa suggested with a hissing laugh. Her species is young. Maybe they have not learned what fear is yet. Then I will teach her, Draxus promised. And his voice was thick with anticipation. Kalov should have warned Maya, should have found some way to tell her that the game was about to change. But he convinced himself that she must already know, that anyone with eyes could see Draxus was escalating towards something terrible. Besides, what could he possibly do against a Corthan? He was just a Scythian, small and weak and utterly helpless in the face of real violence. The best he could do was stay out of the way and hope that whatever happened, it happened quickly. But as the days passed, Calvaros began to notice things about Maya that made him question everything he thought he knew about humans. She was not just passively enduring the harassment, she was observing it, cataloging it, learning from it with a patience that seemed almost predatory in its intensity. He caught her watching Draxus during combat training, her dark eyes tracking his movements with an analytical focus that had nothing to do with fear. She studied how he moved, how he attacked, where his armor was thickest and where it showed gaps. She noted which instructors intervened in conflicts and which ones looked the other way. She was learning his patterns like a scientist, studying a dangerous specimen, and sometimes, when Draxus turned his back after another petty humiliation, Calvaros saw something flicker across Maya's face that made his survival instincts scream warnings he could not quite understand. It was not fear, and it was not anger, but something older and colder, something that looked almost like anticipation. The smile she wore never reached her eyes. Calvaros began to wonder if he had been wrong about which of them was the predator and which was the prey. The thought was absurd. Of course, Maya was tiny and soft and had no natural weapons to speak of, but he could not shake the feeling that everyone in the academy was missing something important. Breaking point came on a perfectly ordinary day in the dining hall, when Draxus decided that Maya's silence was no longer entertaining enough and that louder methods were required. He strode up to her table while the entire hall watched, grabbed her tray of food, and dumped it over her head with a theatrical flourish that drew gasps and nervous laughter from the crowd. "Oops," he said with mock sincerity. "How clumsy of me, but then again, I hear humans are used to eating garbage on their filthy little planet." Maya sat perfectly still as synthetic protein dripped down her face and into her lap. She did not cry or shout or try to run, and for one long moment, the entire dining hall held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then she looked up at Draxus, and she smiled. It was the same smile she always wore, small and polite and utterly without warmth. But something in her eyes made the Korthon take an involuntary step backward. It lasted only a heartbeat before he recovered his composure and laughed it off as nothing, but Kelvros saw it happen. And he knew that Draxus had seen something in that smile that frightened him, too, Maya said quietly. So quietly that only those closest could hear. What? Draxus demanded. Nothing, Maya replied. And she began cleaning herself off with calm, methodical movements. Just counting. The Korthon snorted and walked away, his followers trailing behind him like the cowards they were. And the dining hall slowly returned to normal as students pretended they had not just witnessed another human being humiliated in front of everyone, but Kelvros could not stop thinking about that single word too. He did not know what it meant, but somewhere deep in his instincts, in the part of his brain that had kept his ancestors alive through millions of years of being hunted, he felt absolutely certain that Draxus should be afraid, very, very afraid. The observation deck on the eastern wing of the academy was one of the quietest places on the entire station, a curved room of transparent walls that looked out into the endless void of space. Kelvros often came here to study, to think, to escape the constant pressure of existing in a place where he was always the weakest creature in the room. He was alone that evening. Or so, he thought, his scales casting soft blue light across his data tablet as he reviewed xenobiology notes for an upcoming examination. The stars outside burned cold and distant, and for a few peaceful moments, he could almost forget that he lived in a world of predators. Then he heard footsteps approaching, and his hearts began to race. Maya entered the observation deck first, her small form silhouetted against the starlight as she walked toward the massive viewport. She seemed lost in thought, her dark eyes reflecting the distant galaxies like mirrors. And Kelvros held his breath as he watched from his corner seat. Hoping she would not notice him, she did notice him. Of course, humans always seem to notice everything, but she only gave him a small nod before returning her attention to the stars. It was the closest they had ever come to actual interaction, and Kelvros felt a strange mix of relief and guilt wash over him then. Draxus arrived. The Korthon did not walk so much as he prowled, his massive form filling the doorway like a living nightmare. Behind him came Thissa and two other followers, their expressions eager and cruel as they fanned out to block any escape route. Look what we have here, Draxus rumbled, his voice echoing through the empty deck. The little human, all alone in the dark. How convenient. Maya turned to face him, and Kelvros saw that same small smile on her face. That same empty politeness that had confused and infuriated the bully for weeks. She did not run or scream or call for help, and something about her stillness made Kelvros press himself deeper into the shadows. Draxus, she said, and her voice was calm, almost conversational. I wondered when you would try something like this. Try something? The Korthon laughed, advancing slowly across the deck. I am not trying anything, little prey. I am simply teaching you a lesson you should have learned weeks ago. His followers spread out around Maya in a loose circle, cutting off any path to the doors. Kelvros knew he should do something, should call for help or create a distraction, or at least bear witness to what was about to happen. But his body was frozen with fear as he watched the scene unfold. You see, I have been patient with you, Draxus continued, his burning eyes fixed on the small human with predatory intensity. I gave you every opportunity to show proper respect, to learn your place in the natural order. But you refused to learn, so now I must be more direct. He was close enough to touch her now, looming over her like a mountain of muscle and armor and killing intent. Maya had to crane her neck back to meet his gaze, and from Kelvros' angle, she looked impossibly small against his massive bulk. What are you going to do? Maya asked, and there was something strange in her voice, something that did not sound like fear at all. "I am curious." "Curious?" Draxus blinked, momentarily thrown off by her unexpected response. "You should be begging for mercy, not asking questions." "I do not beg," Maya said simply. "It wastes time." The Korthon's eyes narrowed dangerously, and Calvros saw his massive hand shoot out like a striking serpent. 4 clawed fingers wrapping around Maya's throat and lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing at all. Her feet dangled in the air as Draxus brought her face close to his own, his serrated teeth gleaming in the starlight. "Let us see how long your species can survive without oxygen," he said, and his voice was thick with anticipation. "I hear humans are fragile. Perhaps I will learn something interesting about your anatomy." Calvros wanted to scream, wanted to run for help, wanted to do anything except watch this tiny girl die in front of him. But his body refused to obey his commands. He was a Scythian, a prey species, and every instinct he possessed told him to stay hidden and survive. What happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. Maya's hands came up, not clawing desperately at Draxus's grip like any sensible prey would do, but moving with calm, deliberate purpose. Her fingers found his thumb, the weakest point of any grasping limb, and she bent it backward with a sharp, precise motion that produced a cracking sound Calvros would never forget. Draxus screamed. It was not the roar of an angry predator or the snarl of a creature in battle, but a high-pitched shriek of pure agony that echoed off the observation deck's walls. His grip released instantly as his hand spasmed, and Maya dropped to the floor in a controlled crouch that looked almost rehearsed. She did not wrinkle brows, watched in frozen disbelief as the tiny human straightened up and advanced toward the massive Korthon, who was still clutching his broken thumb in shock. Her movements were fluid and economical, wasting no energy on unnecessary motion. And her face had changed. The polite smile was gone, replaced by an expression of focused intensity that made her look like an entirely different person. Her fist connected with Draxus's throat before he could recover, striking a precise point that made him gag and stumble backward. Then she moved again, impossibly fast for a creature with no natural speed adaptations, and her palm slammed into his temple with enough force to snap his head sideways. The Korthon's followers stood frozen, too shocked to intervene, as Maya pressed her attack with surgical precision. She struck the nerve cluster behind his ear, a vulnerable point that every species assumed was protected by his armored hide. And Draxus made a sound that was almost a whimper as his secondary heart struggled to compensate for the neurological damage. He fell 3 meters of apex predator, evolved on a heavy gravity death world, collapsed to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His body convulsed once, twice, and then lay still except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Maya stood over his fallen form, breathing steadily, her dark eyes scanning the room for additional threats. When she looked at Thesa and the other followers, they scrambled backwards so fast that one of them tripped and fell. "Anyone else?" Maya asked, and her voice was still calm, still controlled, still utterly without fear. They ran. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving Maya alone with Draxus's unconscious body and Calvros's horrified witness. She stood motionless for a long moment, staring down at the bully who had tormented her for weeks. And Calvros saw her take a single deep breath before the tension drained from her shoulders when she turned toward him. The small smile was back on her face, and Calvros finally understood what it meant. It was not politeness or submission or fear. It was a warning. Humans smiled to show their teeth. "You saw everything," Maya said. And it was not a question. Calvros nodded, his scales flickering with anxious patterns of light he could not control. His throat was too tight to speak, his mind still struggling to process what he had just witnessed. "Good," Maya said. "The instructors will need a witness, I want them to know exactly what happened here. And why? She walked toward the door, stepping over Draxus's body without a second glance, and paused at the threshold to look back at Kelvros with those dark, ancient eyes. For the record, she said softly, I gave him 3 chances. That is 2 more than my species usually offers. Then she was gone, and Kelvros was left alone with the unconscious body of the most feared student in the academy, trying to understand how everything he thought he knew about humans had been so completely, terrifyingly wrong. The doors to the observation deck burst open exactly 43 seconds after Maya walked out, and Instructor Voss came charging through with a medical team close behind. She was a Kelvani, a species known for their speed and their dedication to maintaining order, and her 4 eyes scanned the room with professional urgency. Then she saw Draxus on the floor, and she froze. Rose watched from his corner as the instructor processed the scene before her. The most powerful student in the academy, a Corthon predator whose species had conquered 3 star systems, lying motionless on the ground with his limbs twitching in the aftermath of what looked catastrophic neurological trauma. What happened here? Voss demanded, her voice sharp with a mixture of shock and authority. Medical team, assess the patient. Someone explained this to me immediately. The medical drone swarmed over Draxus like a cloud of mechanical insects, scanning his vitals and administering emergency stabilizers. One of the medics, around Pelori with 6 nimble arms, made a distressed whistling sound as he reviewed the readings. Instructor, the damage is extensive, the Pelori reported. His primary neural cluster has been partially disrupted, and several critical nerve junctions have been traumatized. He will survive, but he's going to need months of regeneration therapy before he can walk properly again. Voss's 4 eyes widened, and she turned toward Kelvros with an intensity that made his scales flicker with nervous light. You Scythian student, you were here when this happened, she said. And it was not a question. Tell me exactly what you saw, and do not leave out a single detail. Kelvros swallowed hard and stepped forward on shaking legs. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to stay quiet, to protect himself, to avoid getting involved in whatever political nightmare was about to unfold. But he remembered Maya's eyes and the calm certainty in her voice, and he knew he could not stay silent any longer. Draxus attacked her, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. The human Maya-chan, he cornered her here with his followers, and he grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground. And she defended herself. She defended herself, Voss repeated slowly, her gaze moving from Kelvros to the unconscious Corthon and back again. This tiny human girl defended herself against a fully grown Corthon predator, and this is the result? Yes, Instructor. How? Voss started, then stopped, shaking her head as if trying to clear it. No, that can wait. You said he had followers. Where are they now? They ran, Kelvros said. After the human defeated Draxus. They ran away. The instructor was quiet for a long moment, her 4 eyes blinking in different sequences that Kelvros could not read. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, more thoughtful. I need to find the human student, she said to the medical team. Stabilize Draxus and transport him to the medical bay. I want a full report on his condition within the hour. She found Maya in the corridor outside, walking calmly toward the student quarters as if nothing unusual had happened. Kelvros followed at a distance, too invested in the outcome to simply walk away, and he watched as Voss approached the small human with visible caution. Maya-chan? The instructor called out. Maya stopped and turned, her expression politely attentive. There was no blood on her hands, no visible sign that she had just dismantled apex predator with nothing but her bare fists. Yes, Instructor? I need you to come with me to the administrative office, Voss said carefully. There has been an incident involving Draxus War. And I understand you may have been involved. I was involved, Maya agreed. Her tone conversational. He attacked me, and I defended myself. Is he still alive? The question hung in the air like a blade. And Kelvros saw something flicker across Voss's face. Not fear exactly, but a new awareness. A recognition that she might be standing in front of something far more dangerous than she had initially assumed. He is alive, Voss confirmed. Though he will require significant medical treatment. You did considerable damage to his neural systems. Maya nodded. As if this was expected, I aimed for non-lethal targets, she said. If I had wanted him dead, he would be dead. I wanted him to survive so he could remember this lesson, and so others could learn from his example. The silence that followed was profound. Kelvros felt his scales shifting through colors he could not control as he processed what Maya had just admitted. She had not simply defended herself in a moment of desperate survival. She had deliberately chosen to spare the life of her attacker, had calculated her strikes to disable rather than kill, had thought through the consequences, even while fighting for her survival. What kind of species could do that? What kind of evolution produced creatures who could switch so completely between gentle passivity and lethal efficiency? Who could smile through weeks of harassment and then unleash violence with surgical precision the moment it became necessary? Instructor Voss seemed to be having similar thoughts, because she stared at Maya for a long moment before speaking again. You could have killed him, she said quietly, and it sounded almost like an accusation. Yes, Maya replied, and the single word carried more weight than any explanation ever could. The investigation that followed lasted 3 days, and it turned the academy upside down. Tessa and the other followers were brought in for questioning, and they told the truth, perhaps for the first time in their lives, about everything Draxus had done to Maya over the past 3 weeks. They described the harassment, the humiliation, the escalating violence, and the final attack that had led to his downfall. The security recordings confirmed everything. The administration reviewed the footage from the observation deck, and Kelvros heard that several senior officials had to watch it multiple times because they simply could not believe what they were seeing. A human girl, half the size of a Korthan, had taken apart an apex predator in less than 10 seconds using nothing but her bare hands and an understanding of anatomy that bordered on the terrifying. It was self-defense, the official ruling declared. Maya Chun acted within her rights as a student of this academy, responding to an unprovoked physical assault with appropriate force. But the true verdict was delivered in the whispers that spread through the station like wildfire. The humans, it seemed, were not the harmless newcomers everyone had assumed them to be. Their world had not made them victims, it had made them survivors, had forged them into something that could endure any hardship and overcome any threat. Not through size or strength or natural weapons, but through patience and precision and an absolute refusal to surrender. Kelvros saw students gathering in the library, pulling up every piece of classified research on Earth they could access. And the things they learned made even the bravest predators go paleo. World of extreme temperatures and natural disasters and venomous creatures and scarce resources, where humans had clawed their way to the top of the food chain, through nothing but determination and cleverness, and an evolutionary trait called persistence. Hunting that allowed them to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They were the monsters of their own world. And the galaxy had just discovered that it had invited them. Draxus woke up in the medical bay on the 2nd day, and the first thing he asked was whether the human was being punished when they told him she had been cleared of all wrongdoing. He began to cry. Kelvros was not sure whether it was from pain or fear or the shattering realization that he was not the apex predator he had always believed himself to be. Whatever the cause, the sound of a Korthan weeping was something he had never expected to hear. And something he would never forget, Maya-chan continued attending classes as if nothing had happened. Still small and soft-spoken and unfailingly polite. And no one, not a single student in the entire academy, ever bothered her again. The academy was never the same after that day in the observation deck, and Kelvros watched the transformation with a mixture of wonder and quiet satisfaction. The social hierarchies that had ruled the corridors for as long as anyone could remember began to crumble. Not all at once, but slowly and inevitably. Like ice melting under a distant sun, Draxisvar spent 6 months in the medical bay. And when he finally emerged, walking on legs that still trembled from regenerated nerve damage, he was a different creature entirely. The burning arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by something hollow and uncertain. And he moved through the station like a ghost of his former self. No one feared him anymore. The other bullies noticed. Of course, they could not help but notice when the apex predator of their little world had been brought low by a creature half his size, and they began to reconsider their own positions in the food chain. If a Korthon could be defeated so easily, what chance did they have against the patient, smiling humans who were slowly spreading through galactic society? One by one, they changed their ways. Some did it out of fear, others out of a grudging respect for the lesson Maya had taught. But the result was the same. The academy became a safer place for the prey species, for the small and the weak and the different. For everyone who had once been a target, Kelvros found himself standing a little taller as he walked through the corridors, his scales glowing with a confidence he had never felt before. He was still a Scythian, still fragile and clawless and vulnerable, but something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of the universe. Strength he had learned came in many forms. The classified files on Earth became the most requested documents in the Academy library, and students of every species gathered to learn about the death world that had produced humanity. They read about the ice ages and the volcanic winters and the mass extinctions that had shaped human evolution, and they marveled at the sheer stubborn persistence of a species that refused to die. They learned about persistence hunting, that terrifying adaptation that allowed humans to chase prey across endless distances until the prey simply collapsed from exhaustion. They learned about the human capacity for endurance, for surviving injuries that would kill other species, for pushing through pain and fear and despair to achieve their goals. They learned about the human brain, that remarkable organ that could plan years or decades into the future, that could hold grudges for generations, that could construct elaborate strategies and execute them with mechanical patience. And they learned about the human smile, that gesture which seemed so harmless, but which had evolved as a display of teeth, a warning from one predator to another that said, "I'm watching, I'm waiting, and when the time comes, I will not hesitate." Kelvros found Maya in the library 1 week after the incident, studying xenobiology notes as if she had not fundamentally altered the social dynamics of the entire station. She looked up as he approached, and he saw that familiar small smile on her face, but this time he understood what it meant. "May I sit here?" he asked, his voice only trembling slightly. "Of course," Maya said, and she gestured to the seat across from her with a graceful movement that belied the deadly precision he now knew those hands possessed. They sat in silence for a moment, Kelvros was struggling to find the words for everything he wanted to say. Finally, he settled on the question that had been burning in his mind since he watched her walk away from Draxus's fallen body. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you wait so long?" he asked, his scales flickering with curious patterns. "You could have stopped him the first day. You could have shown everyone what you were capable of and avoided weeks of harassment." Maya was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes distant as she considered his question. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried the weight of something ancient and hard-won. "Where I come from, we have a saying," she said, and there was a wistfulness in her tone that Kelvros had never heard before. Walk away twice the third time. They learn. I do not understand. Maya leaned back in her chair. And for the first time since Calvros had known her, she looked tired, not physically exhausted, but weary in a deeper way, as if she carried burdens he could not see. Humans have been the most dangerous predators on our planet for a very long time, she explained. We learned early that violence has consequences, that every fight carries costs even when you win, that the best battles are the ones you never have to fight at all. She paused, her eyes focusing on something in the middle distance. So we develop patience. We learn to give warnings, to offer chances for the other party to back down, to make it absolutely clear that we did not want conflict before we resorted to it. The first time someone threatens us, we walk away. The second time, we walk away again. But the third time, they learn, Calvros finished. Finally understanding. Exactly, Maya said, and her smile finally reached her eyes. Drax has had 3 chances to leave me alone. He chose not to take any of them. And now he understands why that was a mistake. She reached across the table and placed her small hand over Calvros' S-scaled one. A gesture of connection that made his heart beat faster with something that was not quite fear. The galaxy seems to think humans are either harmless victims or terrifying monsters. She continued. But the truth is simpler than that. We are survivors, Calvros. And we have learned that kindness and violence are not opposites, but tools to be used when appropriate. We smile because we want to be friends. We fight because we refuse to be victims. And we remember because we never want to repeat the mistakes of our past. Calvros sat with her for hours that day, listening to stories about Earth and humanity and the long bloody history that had forged her species into what they were. He learned about the wars and the famines and the natural disasters that had nearly driven them to extinction time and time again. And he learned about the hope that kept them going. The stubborn belief that tomorrow could be better than today. That the universe was not merely a place of competition and survival, but a canvas upon which they could paint something beautiful. When he finally left the library that night, Calvros understood something that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to grasp. The humans were not here to conquer or to submit, but to offer something that had never existed before. They were offering partnership, true partnership, between equals who respected each other's strengths and protected each other's weaknesses. They were extending a hand of friendship to every species willing to take it. And that hand was backed by the certainty that they could defend themselves if that friendship was betrayed around the Academy. Word spread of the Scythian and the human who had become unlikely friends. Some species mocked Calvros for associating with a creature from a death world, but most simply watched with growing curiosity as he and Maya studied together, ate together, and laughed together in the corridors. Other humans arrived at the station over the following months, and each one was treated with a mixture of respect and wariness that had been entirely absent before Maya's lesson. They were small and soft, and they smiled too much. But everyone now understood what lurked beneath that gentle exterior. The bullies kept their distance. Predators reconsidered their behavior, and slowly, gradually, the Academy became something it had never been before. A place where species actually cooperated instead of merely coexisting years later. When Calvros had become a respected xenobiologist and Maya had risen to a position of diplomatic importance, they would often return to that observation deck where everything had changed. They would stand before the stars and remember the day when a small human girl had taught an entire galaxy that there was something more terrifying than claws and fangs and armor. Consequences. The humans had brought consequences to a universe that had forgotten what the word meant, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. But Calvros thought, as he watched his friend smile at the distant stars, that this was probably a good thing for everyone after all. Sometimes the best lessons were the ones that left a mark.